And I actually think so many women that I've interviewed or talked with over the years, they're like, I meet all these guys and they're going nowhere because they don't say like, here's what I'm doing with my life. Here's what I want to do. And I've seen it just recently. My daughter talked to this guy. She's 18. She was talking to this guy and he's like, here's what I want to do. Here's the life. And she was like, wow, that's so attractive. You know, like I think the big piece that I've seen is that for whatever reason, a lot of men have stopped investing in their families the same way. They've invested for money. They're getting money and they'll work their butts off. You know, you see a lot of people who will go become a doctor and then they'll go and work and then their kids and family will hate them later. So men they've been investing so heavily in their family, and this is myself included, so I don't want to pretend like I'm better. This is some of the research, but then we didn't know what our impact was in the family.
And I want you to take a moment and think back on your childhood. Remember hanging out with your buddies? You know, it didn't seem to matter which house you were at, right? Whether you're we're always at somebody's mom's house. And that would be, we'd get there and that's when they'd have something there for us to eat or, you know, take care of us. And it was actually really good and innocent times. But then you fast forward and you think about how life begins to take a different shape for people in their lives. And, you know, when post-secondary education comes on and careers, and we go out and we start families, and soon you start to hear of some stories about some failed relationships and marriages, and maybe even had some convictions. Yeah, that was a story that I remember of my neighbor's son. I couldn't believe it when I heard that story that, you know, that he had been convicted for first-degree murder. But the question is that how can we come out of an environment like that where there's solid families units being shown, and we have high values, that at the end, we still have such high divorce rates and we have other issues? Well, today my guest is going to unpack a theories about what he's developed about managing businesses and families. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, husband, and entrepreneur, then I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest. You know, it's in this program where you're going to accomplish more, develop more, and become more in the next 90 days than you ever have. And you can get more information about this at our Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeBonso. Before we get started, let me ask you a couple of questions. Think back to your childhood. Who did you spend the most time with, and who do you remember from school? Now, looking at them today, were there any surprises for how their life turned out? And how about for you? You know, many of us consider our personal and business lives to be separate entities. And for the most part, they kind of are. But look at any bookshelf and you're going to find countless business books and how to take your business from good to great to built to last. But can you find similar ideas and strategies for your family? Not so much. That is until today. See, my guest is the author of the Family Flywheel, and today it shares with us how we can use business tactics and strategies to create a family business model. So allow me to introduce my guest, Aaron Shelley. Aaron has a BS in mechanical engineering and an MBA. He has worked with small businesses and startups where he developed unique systems perspective on business and family. He works in the academic and business worlds, which had led him to understand how related our families and our business dynamics are. He and his wife have run the largest Irish dance school in Utah. Hopefully we'll get into that today, for over 20 years. And he's built multiple companies, consulted across multiple industries, and has helped raise $54 million as the COO of a technology company. As I said, he lived in Utah with his wife and 4 children. So welcome to the show, Aaron. How are things today?
They're great, Alan. I'm looking forward to this, talking to you about these fun issues, and it should be fun.
Absolutely. You know, I always talk in our work here about everyone being on their own hero's quest. And I just want you to tell us a little bit more about what inspired you to pursue the life that you're living today, and how has that experience shaped you into the man that you are?
Well, like you said, I was an engineer I did that tactic, and then I got frustrated as an engineer. So then I decided I'm going to go do the business thing and understand the business side of things, because the engineer side, I couldn't control it. So then I go to the business side, like, oh, okay, here's how the business questions work. And then I worked for some tech companies. One, ancestry.com, if you're familiar with that. We do genealogy. Worked for them for 5 or 6 years. And then I worked for a startup in genealogy. So I'm in the tech. I was doing fairly well. Well, that startup failed. And then I had this opportunity because of certain things my wife had set up where I didn't need to work and keep this going. So my wife said, what do you want to do? So there was this opportunity to help an academic on a book on business and entrepreneurship, because he was looking at why do certain families have more entrepreneurship levels or groups. So I researched that. In the course of researching that for him, I said, hey, I think here's a better model than the one you're putting in the book. So I put it together, gave it to him, and he said, yeah, that's your book, not mine. So I didn't really want to write a book per se, but I just found that it was working. And then that was in about 2018. And then, like you say, I kind of have been using those principles for the past 5 years, helping people, consulting. I mean, I did this company when we took a company from 20 people to 180 and raised all that money. And then that's allowed me to step back. And now I'm like, well, what is the biggest problem that I think I can have impact with? So that's really been my metric. Where can I have the biggest impact? And I feel like it's in this book and with families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, that opening monologue there and really setting the stage for the story, I was reading your profile and doing a little bit of work on getting ready for today. And you had a similar experience as well about, hanging out with family, with buddies and that. And you saw such a wide variety of challenges. And what have you found is in doing this work now and writing the book, what are you finding to be the common thread, or is there one, or what was happening?
Well, I think the big piece that I've seen is that for whatever reason, a lot of men have stopped investing in their families the same way. They've invested for money. They're getting money and they'll work their butts off. You see a lot of people who will go become a doctor and then they'll go and work, and then their kids and family will hate them later. So men they've been investing so heavily in their family, and this is myself included. So I don't want to pretend like I'm better. This is some of the research, but then we didn't know what our impact was in the family. And one of the books that really, in my research and some of the stuff in my readings was looking at was called The Boy Crisis. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, with William Farrell and John Gray. And they talk about there's like 50 different outcomes that are very negative if a child doesn't have a father in the home. And then and that's for men and women. And the one that was most interesting for me, because I'm interested in the IQ. They said the IQ is 15 points lower if you don't have a father in the home.
Interesting.
So there was a lot of points when I didn't realize the impact beyond. I just assumed my role was protector and provider. And then I didn't understand all of the other impacts I was having on my kids. So I was over focusing on the financial. And that's where there's an author, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but she says it takes men to raise men. And that's where I think we've lost this now. Like we've kind of pushed that off in a lot of cases to our wives, to the school system, which is largely female. And it's not that the women are bad. It's just men and boys tend to have so much more energy. Yeah. They get diagnosed with ADHD because they don't want to sit still and listen to stuff that they don't care about. So I think it's when men back off from their family and focus so much on the financial, that's been the biggest thing that I've seen, where it causes disintegration of families because the wife's like, this isn't working, and those type of things. So I think it's really this backing off of a lot of the roles we used to have, or just the men not being present at all.
Yeah, that's such a great point. What I just was making a few notes there, and one of the ones I wrote down. You talked about protecting and providing for our families, and those two things are things that we really seem to be good at. But the last P on that I hear a lot of time is the preside, and to me, that's what you're talking about. What we're missing is that presiding, and presiding is being present and being there and working on it. Yet we think of it. We would think nothing of as men to go take a course on how to trade stocks, on how to improve, how to maybe take Brazilian jiu-jitsu or something that we would feel that would help us, oversee our families. Yet when it comes to actually doing some of the mental training, some of the softer skills, so to speak, and learning how we can raise our standards of showing up as father, and how to have that conversation, how to have the conversations. We just don't think of that as something to do, because I think for me, in doing some of the men's work we're doing, there's still this idea that, well, I must be broken, or there must be something wrong with me. And I don't know if you're finding this similar with your work.
Yeah, I think a lot of men are very hard on themselves. I think we internalize all the problems. I mean, I had a case when if we go to the Irish dance story, which you talked about, when I'd finished my MBA, and most people, when they get an MBA, they go get a job at a company and then they move there, right? I have money now, I move there. Well, my wife and I, with our Irish dance business, it was about 50 people, so I had some money, but we decided, hey, we're going to do that and put a studio behind our house. Well, and that generated some money, but at the time I had 2 kids and I had this mortgage, and I'm investing in this building and had to remodel and do all these things. And I was having trouble finding work. So for the first 3 years, I was out of work for about 18 months, like half of it. And I just remember day in, day out, it was me and my self-doubt, and me being like, what else could I do? And man, I suck as a husband, and so much beating on me. And there was also, there's some people close to me who actually told my wife that she should leave me.
Oh, wow.
Right. So you get into this scenario, and there's so much like, what did I do? Why am I broken? And men tend to internalize the problems very heavily.
We sure do.
Right. And it seems like for women, a lot of times they externalize them. But for us, we're like, I suck. I'm bad. I'm dumb. Well, my wife stayed with me, and she was very encouraging. And then, like I said, I kind of got onto a trajectory with Ancestry. And then we were doing super well. Right. And then we're like, hey, now let's invest again. And I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. Well, that happened. I was investing in real estate in 2007. Then the whole market gets hit. Yeah. And then I look at it and go, I just lost $250,000. I'm not providing for my family. It would have been better if I wasn't even here. Oh. I'm not protecting them. I put my whole family at risk. And so the psychological burden of that was just like, what was I doing? Yeah. And luckily, I had my dad who lives close by, and I had my wife again who was there, and my mom. But I think it was a lot of my dad and some of the other male friends who came together and were like, yeah, we'll get through that. And so I think there's these places where it's like we internalize so much, and we need other men there, because there's times when it just feels like we have all the weight on our shoulders. So I think it's a lot about, if I look at thinking, if my dad wasn't there and if I didn't have some friends, I don't know. I don't think I would have made it, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about community, right? About having that circle of community, and having, the other thing I just wrote down here is about mentorship, right? It's about being around other men to help us get through those times. And there are going to be those individuals who will, who may think that they're having their best, putting our best in front of us by saying, maybe you should leave him, or maybe you should make this decision, but they don't understand the full complexity about what's going on. And what I'm really happy to hear about your story is that you talk about how you're able to lean on you with your father, who was around to help give you that guidance, and some other men to help get you through these instances. Because let's face it, none of us wake up in the morning and say, what's the best way for me to screw up my family's life today? We just don't do that. It's just life happens. We make decisions. We make decisions as a family to move forward and how we're doing things. And so when the family structure is solid, I think everything else can fall into place. And that's really what I believe that you're modeling, especially when we get into the book in a little bit. But one thing I wanted to talk about is, even before we get into the book, you also have some ideas and some strategies also about how it is that we can get so messed up in the dating world, and how we can fix that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that before we get totally into the family unit.
Well, yeah. So this is where I like to take the ideas from business and move them. If you play between business and family, it gives you a lot of clarity. So if you look at you and I wanted to start a business, and I said, hey, I want to be a lawyer, and you said, hey, I want to be an accountant, we would say, hey, we probably shouldn't go into business together. These are different businesses, right? Or if you said, hey, I want to be a Google, and I want to do Walmart, you'd say we shouldn't go into business. And what's happened, I think, is we're not looking at the other the partner, these women, and saying, well, what type of life are they trying to do? What type of life am I trying to do? And then more going through it like as if it was a job description. Like, if we're going to hire a wife to do work, and she's going to hire a husband to do work, what are the things they're needing? right? Like my wife would have been a horrible wife, in my opinion, for Donald Trump because he needed someone who was, out there, socialite, not so much doing a lot of the work that I need done and that I want done.
Yes.
And same with, there's some very attractive models who I would be a horrible husband for, right? So that's the thing when you get onto these apps, the focus is like hot, 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 like,
Yes.
What are you looking at? It's not looking at it and saying, what is their culture? What is their structure? What are they trying to do in life? And then does it fit with mine? And it's so, and in some ways you could look at it in like kind of a business merger. Why do we have these two businesses and why would they come together? And if they're only coming together because they want to have sex, that's going to be a very bad merger.
Yeah.
And then you'll look at it and go, wow, now the merger's effed up and we've screwed a lot of stuff up. Now we're getting divorced. Now all this value's been destroyed. That's how we look at it in the business world. And that's exactly how it is in the family world. We're not looking and saying, is this a good culture fit? Is this a good structure fit and a strategy fit? We're just looking and saying hot or not, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's only looking at one aspect and it's a fleeting aspect. And yes, I've read stories and I've heard of, the couples that have been married for 50 years and they still have this passion that they had in the early days. But the fact of the matter is that the passion changes over time. And it becomes something much different, and the intimacy changes and evolves. And so, and it does so in those other relationships that are lasting. Like my wife and I, we were just talking about it the other day. Like we've been together for 26 years now, and we both looked at each other like, "Wow! Like where did the time fly?" And because there is so much more than just the initial attraction, there's so much more that we've built that helps drive the relationship forward. And so I really like how you're combining this idea of business, the business model and the concepts within business and putting it into relationship. And one of the most important ones we have in our life is in a marriage, and how we can make that use those ideas and strategies to really solidify the whole structure.
Well, yeah. And I like the term you used. Look at what my wife and I built.
Yeah.
This is a creative endeavor. It's building a business. It is building a family. This is not easy. This isn't trivial. And that's the thing is you look at the building process, again, going back to the business, if your wife is taking care of the health of the family, all of those type of things, and you're taking care of the finances, then you can both appreciate each other, because just like in a business, there's the sales team and the product team. And you go, it's so good that the salespeople want to sell because the developers don't want to talk to people. And the developers are like, the sales guys are like, I don't want to learn that crap. So you have this great synergy and appreciation. And it's the same in a family. You develop so much appreciation if you're both going in the right direction. So that's where I think it's so important to go, like, what are we trying to do together?
Yeah.
Because then you can go, great, let's split up the work and do it together. And then we can appreciate the strengths of each other so much more.
Absolutely. And I purposely was using the two book titles, and it's Jim Peterson's two books, right? Good to Great and Built to Last. And he would talk about, it's not just about getting the right people on the bus. It's about having them in the right seat. And now let's dovetail and have that on this family conversation. It's about what are the things that I'm good at and I like to do within the relationship, and what are the things that my wife likes to do that she's good at. And then that's how we divide the task. That's how we build the structure. We don't have to, if I'm not somebody that wants to dive into an Excel spreadsheet and look at the monthly financial statements for the family, then why would I do that? It's never going to get done. And if it does get done, it'll probably be done sloppily, and it just causes more tension. And so it really comes down to looking at some values that we share. What are the things that we're good at? And maybe at some point in time, we may need to outsource different parts of it. So now you also talk about why marriage shouldn't be a 50-50 proposition. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, so I look at structurally it's 50-50. We both own 50% of it, right? But if you came in, let's go back to the business. If I said, hey, Alan, you and I are going to start a business. You'll give 50% and I'll give 50%. We'd both be like, what the crap are you talking about? I'm not going to go into business with someone who's given 50%. Yeah. I want someone who's given 100% to their role. I'll give 100% to my role, and then we'll be better off. So, and I've seen so many people who are like, well, he needs to wash the dishes. She needs to do this. Why would you'd never do that in a business? When would you say, like, the salespeople, they need to write code 50% of the time, and the coders, they need to sell 50% of the time? It's so ludicrous in the business sense. And yet for some reason, we think it's functional in the family sense. There's definitely points when I'll pick up the slack if things need to happen, and I've changed diapers and I've, bought food and made meals and done all that stuff. But that is not what I'm best at. And that's only when my wife is saying, hey, I'm getting stressed because, it's St. Patrick's Day and I have all these shows. Okay, then I'll jump in and take it.
Yes.
So that's where I say it's got to be 100%. Like, we're all in. What does the family need? Not, well, that's not my job, therefore I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear, it's great that you bring that up, because I was just thinking of a couple that my wife and I were counseling for a little while ago, about a year ago, and that's the exact kind of conversations they were having on the couch with us. And it was about, well, he doesn't do the dishes enough. Literally, that's what it was. He doesn't, and when he does do the dishes aren't done properly, and it was just constant berating. And we just looked at them and just said, what would happen if instead that the dishes were done however he chooses to do it, but he does it and you can be okay with it? Maybe if the sink he's using the left sink instead of the right sink, and maybe he's not doing it in the exact same format. But is it about the task being done, or is it really about the process that it's being done? And it's interesting when you start to speak with people that way, that they start to think a little bit differently about what's actually happening, right? Because there's more going on than just, especially with this couple, more going on than just the dishes. There was other stuff that this dishes was just a symptom of what the other issues are in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And like you say, the whole 50-50 usually is like a scorecard. Well, wait. And then I'm like, well, okay, what do I get when my roof was leaking and I'm up there in the middle of the rain, it's slip and I could die? Do I get 3 dishes worth? Like, what the heck? There's no comparison for this crap. And so, I'm mowing the lawn, or I'm working on all these different problems. You're doing these different things. Like, you're birthing a child. Oh, what's that worth? Like, there's no constant here. So it's just like, well, you do 100 and I'll do 100 and we'll both push. But as soon as we get into this trying to score keep, it becomes such a caustic environment.
Yeah, totally. It totally does. Let's get into the book a little bit now. And as I was looking at some of the material for your book and that, you really have an interesting concept and how you've pulled business in here. So let's start off by talking a little bit about what are the different family structures and why are some of them more successful than others?
Well, so if we look at structure, I talk about there's a business model and there's like a structure. So if you go, the structures are things like, well, is it a single parent? Is it 2-parent? Is it living with an extended family? Your parents living with you, or you living with your parents? Or is it a blended family? Is it like cohabitation? Like, all of these models are there. The problem you end up with some of them, like for instance, cohabitation. If I say, hey, let's cohabit, what is that really saying? It's like, well, why don't we move in together? But I'm not sure if we're actually going to work. It'd be like if we said, hey, let's go into business together, but let's not actually sign anything. Let's just kind of start doing some work. And you would go, wait a minute. It doesn't seem like you're all in. I'll keep my side. I'll keep my job. You keep your job. And then we'll kind of do something.
Yes.
What? So there's some of the structures where you go, there's inherent issues that need to get resolved in there. And then you're going to try to cohabit. And it's like, well, resolve the issue and then worry about it. And I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just saying there's an inherent, if some very wealthy man walked up to most women and said, hey, like Elon Musk, like, hey, let's get married, I don't think they'd be like, no, let's cohabit first. They'd be like, no, I know you got it done. So that's the thing, is there's some underlying stuff that's going to be involved there. Yeah. And then if you look at things like blended families, you're just adding in more people and more logistics.
Right.
So the more complicated, same with extended family. If you had your parents living with you, okay, well, whose rules going to be followed? Whose culture is going to get followed? And you're going to be, if it was your in-laws, then you're like, oh, freak, now I've got 3 against 1. How's that going to work? Or vice versa, then you end up with increase. So it's not that you can't do it. It just makes things more complicated. Yeah. So it's really just being aware of the complications and going, how's this going to complicate our marriage? Like if your father died and then your mother moved in with you, you're like, things are going to get interesting. And that's definitely what I've seen with my parents as they went through that transition. And so you're like, well, how do those things play out? And we need to be aware of them. Otherwise we're like, well, now we have all these problems that we didn't think about. We didn't strategize beforehand. and we didn't find solutions to, and all these extra jobs. So that's what I look at. Like the structure, you can have a structure, you just have to, any of those, but you have to be aware of the strengths and weaknesses. Otherwise you're going to end up with problems.
Absolutely. And it's about having those conversations to really understand. And I think for a lot of times, and our focus here is with men, is that I think sometimes we would rather jump off a bridge than have a hard conversation or a crucial conversation with our spouses, because there's so much that we feel that's at stake. But we need to have those, and all those different family structures you talked about require having a deeper conversation than just, hey, we'll figure it out later. Figuring it out later in business is a recipe for disaster. If you were trying to figure things out as you went along, unless there are some aspects to business there is, but the big stuff it needs to be mapped out, needs to be understood, so that all the participants in it have an understanding of how they're going to plug into the model.
Well, and yeah, you go back to getting the business side. When you have someone move into your house, all of a sudden you're like, it would be like you and I in business, and then all of a sudden, hey, we're going to add a third partner in here. Wait a minute. How's it? Are they a minority partner? How does this work? Do they have a say? Can we ignore them? Like, what's the dynamic there? So that's really what you start to get into. It's like adding a partner and another person, and all of a sudden the relationship where it had a dynamic, now you have a separate dynamic that you have to deal with.
Absolutely. So let's get into the family business model. Now, looking at your family business model, you have this image of a pie, and you've got it into 3 different sections. Talk a little bit about the business model, the family business model, and what the sections are all about.
Yeah. So the business model, as I call it, it's kind of in the business world, a business model is how you're going to make money. What's your decision-making process? So and I'll use Google and Walmart as kind of the examples. So if you look at Google, they have a strategy, and their strategy involves the purpose and the mission of organizing the world's data. And then they have a structure, and that structure is actually a fairly flat organization. They don't try to have too many levels of those type of things. They're not a lot of managers that you have to get approval from, because they want a lot of flexibility for their people. And then their culture is all about being productive and creative. Mm-hmm. So if you do your best work at 4 a.m., great. Do your best work at 4 a.m. No one's going to get on your case. Right. But if we contrast that to a Walmart, their strategy is to provide goods to families across the world at reasonable prices. Well, their structure is based around their distribution centers and their stores. And then they have a hierarchy within their stores. If so-and-so is absent, how does it work? And so they have a very strong structure for that. And their culture is not one of creativity. We don't need you to create. We need you to do a specific job, follow directions, do exactly, come in on time or you're fired, stay the whole time or you're fired, that type of stuff. Yeah. So you can see both of those are very successful companies, yet they have a very different strategy, structure, and culture. And you couldn't take Walmart's culture and put it in Google. If you did that, all the engineers would be like, screw this, we're done, we quit. And if you took Google's company over to Walmart, we'd be going in and being like, hey, there's nothing on the shelves. This doesn't work. So the culture, strategy, and structures have to be aligned with each other. Otherwise, you have massive friction, and that's when you'll have failure. So now if we jump back to family, the family is the same thing. What is the purpose of your family? What is the mission that you and your wife are working towards? And if you're like, well, I want to move to Florida, and she's like, but I want to stay in Winnipeg my whole life. Oh, great. Like you got to get those things aligned. And then you have careers as part of that strategy. What career are you going to pursue? What's she going to pursue? And then you have the structure. Well, how are we going to structure jobs like we talked about? Is it who's in charge of the finances? Who's in charge of the house cleaning? Who's in charge of the children? Who's in charge of those things? That's the roles. And then you also end up with the culture. If you're big in an entrepreneur, you need to have a culture of flexibility, constant learning. If you're a blue collar worker, you need more of a culture of hard work, determination, sticking with things regardless of the weather, right? Regardless of how hard it is. So that's the thing where you're looking at your family. You yourself need to have a cohesive business model. Your wife needs to have one. And then together you need to have one that makes sense, right? And so that's where you look at these things going, that business model is the engine that produces the different resources that then we can use to then do more and more. And this is the flywheel effect where it builds on itself. And this is where we say in the business world, I think it was 1999, Google was worth $1 million. Now it's worth 1.5 trillion. Walmart, it took 20 years to build 1,000 stores. And then between the years of 2011 and 2012, they built 1,100 stores.
Yeah.
So you see this flywheel effect of when you have good processes and you have good structure, and then you give the resources to it, then all of a sudden you can do so much more.
No kidding. And what I really appreciate about what you're doing with this work is, as I was looking through your material as well, is that not only are you talking about vision and mission and getting that on the same place, but you also take families through an even deeper process, right? You're even getting into value, their values and their beliefs and their core beliefs and core values and all of that aspect. And so how does that lead towards creating a culture of success, or are there other parts that you're also doing?
Those are really the core things. If you get a business model, if you said, I don't want to work, and your wife says, I don't want to work, okay, where's the money coming from, right? There's always that question in business. But once you have a revenue stream, then there's, well, what's our culture going to be for each other? Am I the big boopa and I can treat you like crap, or are we equals? This is some of the cultural elements. And then if you look at from an entrepreneur perspective, you need to learn a lot. You need to, best idea needs to win in those circumstances. It can't be a, no, I'm the man and I said this, therefore that's how we're doing it.
Yeah.
This is where I go to the business world as well. If you're a CEO and you treat your subordinates like crap, they'll either leave or you'll get fired, right? And if you treat the board of directors like crap, they can fire you too.
Yeah.
So the whole thing of leadership is not dictatorship. It is around leading and putting things together and making a compelling vision and getting people on board. And you should be doing that with your spouse. And I actually think so many women that I've interviewed or talked with over the years, they're like, I meet all these guys and they're going nowhere because they don't say like, here's what I'm doing with my life. Here's what I want to do. And I've seen it just recently. My daughter talked to this guy. She's 18. She was talking to this guy and he's like, here's what I want to do. Here's the life. And she was like, wow, that's so attractive.
Yeah.
So there's that side of, if you're not going somewhere, why would anyone want to go with you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have your own affairs in order, how can we expect to have anybody have trust and faith in what we bring to the table? And again, that goes back to, and some of the work that we do here with the Awakened Man is really, we really dive in and working with guys that have been at that point in their career or their lives, I should say, where maybe the career hasn't turned out the way they wanted it to be. Their relationship and their marriage has totally fallen apart. And their personal life is just really on life support. And part of that is because we've gotten away from, we've allowed, I should say, I'll back up. We've allowed our 20-something dreams to carry us, yet we haven't put in the work, the mental work necessary to continue to have it evolve and change, because our priorities have changed from the time that we were 20 to our 30s, to our 40s, to our 50s. And I think that's just such a huge challenge with families and with, especially with men, is that women, I think, have this better locked down, as you were saying earlier, because women will reach out and have the conversations, and men tend to be a lot more introspective and not share and get that added help. And that's really the work that you're doing in building this family structure and helping them take something that we're actually pretty good at, and that's being in business, because we can relate to that and applying it to something that's so important in our lives. And that's to have that connection with family and our spouses.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things, like I just did a quarterly planning with my family, which is a little weird. And I did an annual planning in December, and what do we do in those meetings? Same thing you would do in a company. Let's reinforce our values. Let's talk about our successes. Let's talk about our failures. What are we trying to work on so we can support each other? And it was interesting in the annual planning, I put together this video that was just saying, here's our 5 values in our family, and just showing how our family lived those over the past year. And at the end of that, I had a couple of my daughters were in tears. Like, that's something I want to be part of.
Yeah.
Right. That shows it's so compelling. And when you're part of something great, and that's where I think for us as men to lead, it's this leading through example, and it's leading through, it's kind of painful to do all this stuff that I've done with structure and putting together the planning. But then I'm like, when I see that, and I'm like, yeah, my kids feel more secure. They also feel like they're part of something great. They don't need to go look around in the world for Oh, who's going to validate? What's the new thing that I need to adopt? Because they realize that we have stability and we have strength because we're united in our goals.
Absolutely. And the other takeaway I'm getting from this, Aaron, is that you've also modeled for your daughters what a husband and a man looks like, how he shows up and how he takes care of his family. And so they have something now, such an important role model to measure the men that they will ultimately choose to be their husbands with, because they have something that very few children have in today's society, unfortunately. And it's because we just didn't know how to do that, to be good fathers. We didn't have necessarily the best teaching from our parents, and that's nothing to slight our parents, because they didn't get much better education than they had, right? So, but we have today so much information. If we just have an opportunity to put it into some form of a structure. And best thing about it is that we don't have to figure this stuff out on our own. They can just go out and buy your book, and they can go out and participate in one of your programs, which we'll get to at the end of the show for sure. And I think there's no reason today for us to have solid family structures and having that be part of our lives. You also reference about what Bill Gates' parents did that was essential for his success. So touch a little bit on that story as well.
Yeah, so this is a story I think that illustrates all the different resources in a family. So Bill Gates' dad, he was a lawyer and then later started his own law firm, right? So there's a little bit of an entrepreneurial show from his dad. His mom was a teacher, Mary Gates. She taught and then she married and then she had 3 kids. Then she stopped working and then she spent her time with her kids. And then at one point when our kids were older, then she decided, I'm going to start serving in the community. So she served on the board of the University of Washington and then the board of United Way. And then she connected with the CEO of IBM while she was serving on the board of United Way. And that was a key connection for Bill that could have been 100 to 150, whatever, his whole company. Maybe Microsoft doesn't exist without that connection. And so you look at this and going, if she could have just focused on the money, okay, my kids are old enough, I'm going to go back to work. But instead, what she did was focused on building the social resources in her family by serving in the community. And then those social resources were able to be exploited by Bill to make this massive company. And so we'd look at this social resources, which in a company we would call our brand, our sales team and our marketing team. It seems like now, for some reason, our society doesn't even recognize that our family should have someone investing in the community and in our society. And so then no one does. And then we go, well, why do we have so many mental health issues? Well, because everyone feels alone. Why do we not have these? Why do we not know? Why are we having problems getting jobs? Well, because the connectors are gone. And so that's where I think in a family, you got to be connecting, you got to be investing not only in the financial resources, but also the social resources and those human resources of abilities and your health. And so if we don't focus holistically and we're just like, I'm a man, I made the money, look, I made $5,000 this month, look at me, I'm the best. And wife, what did you do? Nothing. You just ate all the food. Right. The reality is she was investing for social connections and she was investing in the health of the family, and she was probably investing in your health. So if you want to act like a jerk, you can. But the reality is, just because you were investing in financial resources that made the family great, she was investing in social resources and human resources that made the family great. So that's where I think we can't get too often this like only financial focus. Although I think for men, it's great because there's a number and we love numbers, right?
That's for sure.
But that's really where I think the reality is. We have to holistically focus on what is what is everyone doing in the family from an investment perspective, not just financial.
Yeah, completely agree. Because there's so much more than just the financial. While that's extremely important, there are those other aspects, and that's what we need to have a whole and solid family unit. We've been talking a lot about we've been talking about is how do we build legacy? And so that's my next question for you, Aaron. What does that word mean to you? What does legacy mean to you?
To me, legacy is the propagating of successful families, right? If I have successful kids and then they have kids and they all suck, okay, I wasn't able to propagate those values more than one generation. So for me, it's like, if you have this family business model and you've been successful, you're generating good amounts of money, you're generating good social connections, you're generating all these good resources, you have good health. Well, you need to teach your kids that more so than give them the money, right? The resources are a byproduct of a successful business. They are not the thing you should focus on. Because if you give, there's an example where I talk about in the book where this girl at the age of 20, she was given, her dad had died and he was a successful executive, and she was given $20 million. All 5 of the kids were given 20 million apiece, and the mom was given 100 million. Well, this girl, she's on her 4th or 5th marriage now. She's bought and sold companies because she doesn't know what to do with them and destroyed a lot of value there. So the resources are not useful unless you have the business model that knows how to use them.
Yeah.
Right. That business model is the engine, and all the resources are just fuel.
Yeah.
And so if we focus on those resources, I want to be rich. Really? I want to generate wealth.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a slightly different perspective, but it means something completely different.
Yeah, completely. Well, then that talks about generational piece, right? It's about making that last, I've heard it's talked about how clear is that copy of ourselves? Is it clear enough for one copy? Remember the old carbon paper we would use, right? We're old enough to know that carbon paper. And after a while, that carbon paper doesn't leave a very good copy. But the best part about it is that it does last generational, right? There's lots of use out of it. And so how good is that copy that we're trying to produce? And you've given us a tool and a framework that we can do that. So everything that we go ahead. So
just on the copy thing, the danger with the copy is like, well, my dad was a dentist, so I'm going to be a dentist, right?
Mm-hmm.
My dad, and that's kind of the thing where it's like, you haven't abstracted things out. My grandfather was a farmer, but he had good values and hard work that passed to my mom. Then she passed it on to me. So the values and culture and beliefs can be very important, but you constantly need to be updating those. And so you're not trying to, hey, I want my kids to be exactly like me. No, I want them to have values that create wealth. I want them to have the beliefs that will help them, because if they're trying to be an entrepreneur and they believe they're going to get it on the first time, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, and if you believe failure is bad, like I've heard over in some of the Asian countries, if you start a business and fail, you get blackballed.
Yeah.
But over here in the US, it's like, oh, you learned something, try again. So that's the thing, is you're not trying to create a carbon copy. Like I look at my dad, I would call him a technologist. He learned new technology, he implemented that. Right. So if you looked at it now, we have this AI revolution going on.
Yeah.
If I'm a technologist, I got to learn how that works. And that's where the copy would be a higher level copy rather than just I'm going to try to copy every single aspect, because I have seen that. And when people do that, then it often fails because they missed out on one small piece and then the whole system broke.
Yeah.
Or B, that profession, like my grandpa was a potato farmer. There's not a lot of those left. So.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for that point of clarity, right? And while it was implicit in my mind about copy, it's not about making identical representations. That's what that's the takeaway I'm getting. It's about making sure that we're emulating the core pieces that make sense, the values, the belief structure, the things that are important, that pass generational, and not necessarily doing the same thing exactly the same way, because things evolve and things change. And so thank you so much for bringing that point of clarity. Really appreciated that. Listen, of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there's something we didn't get a chance to touch on, what would be the one takeaway you'd like our listeners to have?
The biggest one would be, do not focus just on financial resources, or you will end up rich, sick, and lonely.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I just want to say thank you so much, Aaron, for spending time with me today. You've been able to give us an idea of and show us how families can operate just like a business. And when we do that, makes our life so much more successful, both at home and at work. Now, if men are interested in getting a hold of you and getting involved in your programs, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can go to my website, thefamilyflywheel.com. I have a lot of resources there. You can contact me on LinkedIn at Aaron K. Shelley. Or Facebook, Aaron K. Shelley, or you can send me an email, Aaron, AARON, at thefamilyflywheel.com as well. I'm really in this to try to help families. I think that families are the pillars of our society, and they're holding up this great Coliseum. And if we keep knocking them out, we're going to have a collapse of which none of us want.
Yeah, 100%. Completely agree. I want to say once again, thanks, buddy, for being on the show. I really appreciated our conversation today.
Yep. Appreciate it. It's been fun.